I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor.
Welcome to Women's Health Unplugged. If you are a new listener, I'm a naturopathic doctor in Ontario. My name is Dr. Jordan Robertson. And my goal for you and I spending this time together every single week is to give you some tools to be able to start to navigate your own healthcare journey, to give you some language to describe what's going on with you so that you can advocate for yourself at your doctor's appointments, but also to expose some of the sort of uniqueness of working in women's healthcare. And that's one of the things that we're going to do today. I'm joined today by one of my colleagues who actually works in my office, Dr. Andrea Gree. Welcome, Andrea.
Hi, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
And we're going to have a really important conversation. It's so interesting, like the women that work in our office in Ontario. So we service women and people of all genders in Ontario virtually or in our physical location outside of Toronto. So we're in Burlington, just outside the GTA. We have so many good conversations in the hallway of the clinic. And what Andrea and I are going to tackle today and talk about today actually started as a hallway conversation around what our time is worth, what it's worth to us to feel well, and how difficult it is to always understand that return on investment when you start to put energy, time, money towards something, how to quantify what you get back. It's so common when we're working with women that we see them deprioritize themselves. They are the lowest in the priority list in their family's health system, in their own health, and they're way more likely to put the needs of other people ahead of themselves without realizing how costly that actually is to her health. So that's what we're talking about today. And it started literally as Andrea and I talking about this one day in the hall. Hey?
Yes, I remember that conversation. And I think we said this should be a podcast.
We did say, and look at us, honoring that decision. Andrea, I'd love if you could walk us through. I always get all our guests to kind of introduce themselves, but basically walk us through how you got to this point in your career, why you are so passionate about supporting women, women in midlife with their metabolism. Talk us through how you got here and why this is, such an important piece for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been interested in health. And I think part of the reason was growing up, I had a grandmother that would always say, Andrea, if you have your health, you can do anything. And so fast forward several years, I did 8 years of post-secondary education, graduated from the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. And for the first 10 years of my career, I actually worked in a medical doctor's office alongside a team of family physicians, which is a bit of a unique experience for naturopathic doctors in Ontario. And it provided me with some interesting opportunities and insights. So the first is it really opened my eyes to the gap in healthcare that naturopathic doctors are really primed to fill, especially as it relates to women's hormonal health. And then I also had the opportunity to perform pap tests for many of the doctor's patients. All of the doctors at the clinic were male at the time. And this was interesting because during these exams, women would often bring up things related to their hormonal health or their menstrual cycle that they never spoke to their male doctor about. Maybe because they were shy, they're embarrassed, or they didn't want to feel dismissed. And so one of the things that I love about being a naturopathic doctor is just having that time to listen, hear my patient's story, educate, empower women, just help them feel more confident about their health and help them find that better version of themselves.
I love that. And I think working in women's health, it's funny. I don't mean to stereotype my male patients, but like if you give your male patients a list of 5 things to do and send them home, they come back 3 months later and you're like, how did you do? And they're like, what do you mean? I just did all the things that you said. Whereas working with women, again, not to stereotype us, it's a much more complicated discussion because they take that treatment plan home. And even though they may know, like deep in their heart, that this is the right next move for them, that they need to put some time and investment towards the things they've talked about, they still see this value conflict between their desires and trying to execute on them in their family unit, in the roles that they're in, and how to divide their time actually towards putting themselves first. Like, what do you notice in the patients that you work with that are the most successful? Well, let's start there. The people that are the most successful at working on their health, like, what are the commonalities between those women? Like, what do those women have?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And I think one of it is kind of exactly that they recognize the value that they provide to their family when they do prioritize their health and when they are in that better mental state, mentally, physically. And so they know that if they put that investment into, packing that lunch or going to the gym or, whatever it is, they're going to be able to show up to whether it's their family or to work that much more successfully. And so I think that's motivating for them versus those where there's a lot of like guilt and maybe just other things getting in the way. They tend to, I think, have a harder time with reaching their goals. It can take a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I always think that return on investment conversation is so fascinating because like in my experience, some of my most successful patients actually paid out of pocket for their appointments. They didn't have insurance and they were self-employed actually. And the difference for those women is that they could see if they didn't feel 100%, they couldn't show up as their best selves at work. And that trade-off like was very clear, right? It's like, I'm going to pay for my health appointment because if my mood is poor and I spend 10 days on the couch in my depressed state, the threat to my business is really significant. So I'd rather pay ahead, right? I'd rather like pay for the appointment, go to the therapy, get my supplements, and therefore not miss a week of work. But for those women, it was so easy, right? To equate like the time and the investment and the effort that they had to put into taking care of themselves because the consequence was like literally lost dollars. And so they're like, take my money because the cost is really great. But when we don't have that example, like right in front of us, it's hard for women to prioritize their own wellness when the consequence is a little abstract. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And
I mean, like, so I don't mean to cut you off, but like the example of like, you said going to the gym, like if you go to the gym and your kids feel like you're happier when you get home from work.
Oh, yeah. I always debate this with myself where if I, had a work day or, and I could either have a choice to where I can go to the gym or I can go home and pick up my kids. And I always have a debate in my mind where, okay, if I go to the gym, I'm going to feel guilty because I haven't been with my kids all day. And yet, if I do go, I'm going to feel so much better. My energy is going to be better. My mood is going to be better. I'm going to make funnier jokes. The kids actually do want me to take the time to go to the gym. And so it's just playing around with that in my head and giving myself the permission to do that.
Yeah. And I think it's like not intuitive, right? I don't think it's intuitive for women to be like, my emotional bandwidth or like how I feel about myself or how I feel in my body is the same as like, my example of my self-employed patient who's like worried about dollars lost, that like there's opportunities lost when we don't show up as our best selves with our family. Like there's still a return on investment when we do the thing or go to the gym or have the health appointment.
Even though it takes some time.
Yeah, it takes time. And then the like, am I trying to say the output is that your family's happier.
Yeah, it has a ripple effect.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because those same women, or if we ask them, we're like, what do you want? They're like, well, I don't feel like I'm the mom I want to be, or like I'm yelly, right? I'm a yelly mom and I don't want to be a yelly mom. When like the thing that we need to do with those women in order for them to not feel that way actually has to do with them putting themselves first, which then it's hard for them to see that trade-off. Like, how do you work through this with women that can't see that forest for the trees, on how taking that first step or self prioritizing is actually the thing that's going to get them towards what their goals are?
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes it's asking a woman or a patient to just say, well, what would you tell your daughter, right? If she was telling you the exact same things, because I think it's very easy for us to tell somebody else, well, yeah, of course, you should do the gym, go to the gym, you should pack your lunch, you should make that appointment, whatever it is. But for whatever reason, it's so hard for us to give ourselves that permission. So I think step one can be like, well, would you tell your daughter or a friend this? Yes. Okay. So let's, reframe that and give ourselves that permission to do that. And then I think step two is, if you're busy, like most of us are, you probably need to delegate or start delegating to free up some space. And I know you've done a great podcast and have spoken about this in the past, right? Because if we're going to ask you to maybe put a bit more time into your day, it's got to come from somewhere. And then step three is probably just starting somewhere. Pick something, whatever that lowest hanging fruit is. Is it going for a walk? Is it joining the class? Is it packing that lunch? Is it making that appointment for yourself so you can get a bit more of that support and guidance?
I'd love to talk about like how this influences metabolism at midlife, because I think, it's when I think about the things that people want to talk about when they sit across from us in the office, it's like, one, they don't love the way that they're showing up in their own life, right? Like either they're grouchy, they're yelly. I was thinking of the yelly mom, right? That's how they feel in their life. And also we're having lots of conversations about metabolism, and where people feel like, especially over the age of 40 or between that 40 and 60, there's so many things happening hormonally. There's so many things happening that kind of tilt the cards not in our favor when it comes to metabolism. And yet the very steps that we need people to take to accomplish those goals of not being a yelling mom, and also, taking, steps towards having their metabolism feel where they want it to feel, actually probably does require some uncomfortable putting themselves first. What do you notice when you're working with women? Like when people are coming in and asking about, I'm going to say, I guess, weight management in their mid 40s, like, do the women know what they need to do in order to make change? Like, what do you notice about that conversation?
I find sometimes yes and sometimes no. And the question that I often ask women that I think brings a bit more clarity and can kind of help the light bulb go off a bit too is, if we were to think the last time you're at that healthy, happy weight, that, body composition, how was your life different then versus how it is now? And the most common thing that comes up, was it was before kids. It's like, okay, well, how was your life different before kids versus now? It's like, well, I had time, right? I didn't have to look after a bazillion things. And so we kind of like bring them back to saying, okay, well, if our goal is to, improve that body composition or help with that weight management, because we know it's going to impact our health positively in the future, then we need to start creating some more time and space so that we can, meal plan, prep, get to the gym, because it is kind of like another part-time job and it doesn't come easily. And that is partly because of how our hormones are changing. We know that resting energy expenditure reduces when we lose estrogen. We know that our muscle mass is declining if we haven't been intentional with maintaining that muscle mass as we get older. And so it does require women to be more intentional to reach that goal, to improve that body composition. And being more intentional requires putting ourselves first and creating space in our calendar to do all these things.
It's interesting because I think when we ask women, like if they have not felt well since they've had kids, you like immediately go to the hormonal implications of having kids or being pregnant or what have you, right? Like that's what you think of immediately. It's like, if you my weight hasn't been easy since I had kids, or my sleep hasn't been great because since I had kids. And like we immediately kind of blame our hormones. And I think there's a disconnect when we talk about metabolism on how important all of those sort of minuscule little pieces are that make up your day or make up your metabolism. If we track people's step count as they get promoted, right? So when you were the like on the floor gal and we're running between offices and, your step count is very different when you're like, middle management or senior at your workplace. And even something as silly as that promotion can actually have a big impact on your energy expenditure during the day and thus your ability to manage your weight and your metabolism. But for women, we often like want to go right to the hormones, right? Like, well, it's not well since I had kids and my hormones are a mess since I had kids. But if we back up, like you said, and said, well, when you were like 27, like what was different about your life then? Like it's so much different, right? I think I walked Toronto like 10 times over every single week when I was 27, whereas now I commute an hour a day. You're right about that like intention piece. Like if you want something to change and you want to put some intention towards it, that probably means that uncomfortable, like pulling it higher up in the priority list.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't think women recognize, like I'll often tell women that, American Heart Association, for weight management, they recommend 60 to 90 minutes of physical activity per day. That's a lot. That's a lot. And you don't have to go from all to none, but it is going to require building it in gradually.
There's this kind of recent study that was done looking at weight management and menopause that I found so fascinating because it polled the people that were in the study. And it was like, do you know what influences metabolism in midlife? And the women that were polled, they knew almost everything. They weren't quite able to articulate like how menopause specifically changes, their resting energy and all of that, like the loss of the hormones. But they were able to say that like, irregular eating patterns lead to overeating and not having enough movement through the day can influence metabolism, and not sleeping well impacts my appetite the following day. They were like really able to articulate all the things that influence metabolism. And then there was the last part of the survey was like, so like, if you know all of these things, like where do you prioritize your own health amongst your family's needs? And all the women in the study were like, oh, mine's at the bottom. Which is so fascinating because they came into the study like saying, yes, I'd like to change my metabolism and weight in menopause. Yeah, I know all the things that need to actually happen in order for that to take place. Oh, no. It's like my health is below my family's health. And I found it so fascinating because I see that in the office all the time where we're asking people to do like maybe big tasks, maybe small tasks, but we're asking them to do something. And there is this massive disconnect between what they want and what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking that's just disconnect, right? Where it's like, this is the outcome I want. And yet these are the other things that are taking up more space or more priority in my life. And then sometimes we have to say, well, is this a goal that we really want to go after then? Because if we can't prioritize it, then keeping it on this to-do list is just more stressful too.
Yeah, it's funny. I've said that often to patients, like, you can put that like backpack down of wanting to lose weight. Like you don't actually have to carry that goal around if you don't want to. You can put it down.
Yeah, we can come back to
carry it around and not, prioritize it. That's different. Like that's hard, right? It'd be way easier if your life circumstances or your goals or intentions have shifted and this is not the right time for you to focus on that. You are totally allowed to put that goal down.
Yeah, I find even a lot of women that I work with, they'll come with the concerns of like low energy, but then also, weight gain, let's say. And, the number one thing I always say is, well, we need to fix this low energy first and park that weight loss goal aside before we can even go there, right? Because those are going to be competing demands. We know that, losing weight or improving that body composition takes a lot of energy, and that in of itself can be more tiring and draining. And so we need to do all those things first to make sure that you're feeling good, whether that's your sleep, making sure you're not iron deficient, which is so common in this population, right? Eating regularly, all those things before we're going to start tackling that weight management piece.
And what's the cost? I would say, like, what's the cost of doing nothing?
Yeah, that cost of inaction
Yeah.
is probably going to be that things either stay the same or get worse before they get better. Is it, I don't have energy to like play with my kids or to go to that thing? Is it that I am like, again, just like a bit more moody, irritable? I'm going to yell maybe at my kids. Is it also there's maybe some resentment that builds because I see my partner is able to do this and yet I can't? And then maybe thinking future down the line, how may this impact my future health? And what am I modeling for my kids? I think those are all the different costs that we can think of, right? Cost of inaction versus action.
Yeah, you've outlined that really beautifully. It's funny. I like immediately go to the like disease risk. I think that's the way we're wired, right? Like, if you do nothing, your likelihood of developing diabetes is X. But you're right. Like, even just if we think about what we want out of our days, what we want out of our relationships, what we want out of our lives, that the cost of not taking care of yourself, and then it's not taking care, like not prioritizing the value. Like if you say the value is health, but it's nowhere in your calendar, it's nowhere in your budget, right? To actually do that, is it really a value, right? Are we actually, I always love that, Brene Brown, like that operationalizing your values, right? How do we say out of one side of our mouth that our health is like super important if our calendar and none of our decisions actually reflect that?
Mm-hmm. And Brene Brown, I think she's also the one that has the permission slip exercise.
What's that? I don't know that.
Yeah, I've heard it of someone else, but it's where you write yourself a permission slip. Like literally, I give myself permission to not fold the laundry, let's say, or I give myself permission to, go for that walk or leave the house a mess or whatever it is. Because often it's true, we just need to give ourselves permission to do that thing. And if we actually write it down, it's supposed to make it easier.
I like that. I like that. And so speaking of like taking those first steps, I want to talk about, and I know you have an event coming up that's going to support women in understanding that whole like metabolism hormone piece. We're going to fill in that gap. So the people in that survey that did not understand how their hormones influenced their metabolism, we're going to fix that. But also when you're working and coaching women around how to take that first step, like what can that look like, or what does that look like? Because I think online there's so much flashy, so much all in, right? It's like, if you're not doing 75 hard, are you even changing your diet? When we know, like when the behavior change research, we actually have way more benefit from doing these like slow, sustainable change. What does those first steps actually look like?
Yeah, it's a good point. When I work with women, and I don't like to say it depends, but it kind of does, because it just depends on the person. But my general approach when I speak with somebody, especially for the first time, is to actually think, okay, what is the least amount that I can change in this person's life that is going to have the biggest impact? And so it's sort of picking that one thing. So if it is, they get a diet recall and they're saying that they're tired, and yet they're going from lunch to dinner without a snack, then is that first step saying, can you pack some Greek yogurt? Or can you take a handful of nuts with you? So it's those small things. Or if it's, sleep and, I'm not getting a good night's sleep. I know I shouldn't be scrolling on Instagram as late as I should. It's like, okay, can we set a cutoff time? So not that you have to totally take it out, but can we just do less of it? Because there's a certain point where it has diminishing returns. And so it's often just finding what are those smaller tweaks to a person's, daily routine that they feel confident in being able to like change. And just remembering you don't have to do it perfectly. right? Being healthy, I always say being healthy isn't being perfect. I'm going to send you with this treatment plan. You don't have to get it all right. You don't need an A to come back. We'll still take you if you did a B or a C or didn't do anything at all. It just means that we need to change our approach a bit. So it's starting with that, small change. And then, of course, having that accountability so we can build on that.
I love that. And I think those, it's funny, like no matter how many times we talk about like some of those small steps, I think that I'm sure that there's some listeners that are like, those things aren't going to change how I feel, right? Like me packing nuts in the glove box of my car is not going to influence my health in the long term. And yet, like, they're the very steps that start to become the building blocks for something bigger. Because if you don't eat the nuts in your glove box, then you maybe overfuel after dinner because you were starving by the time you got to dinner, or you eat all your kids' lunch while you're making dinner that they didn't eat in their Tupperware containers, even if it's a bit soggy, because you're not satisfied, right? So like it starts to build traction in your plan when you can find those like small steps with big impact, because then suddenly you're moving into the dinner hour less cranky and less with less cravings and less hunger. And that those are the very steps that actually start to create momentum like in the other direction. I'm curious where, like, what your personal, hacks are right now, right? Like you've got 2 young kids, you work full time. Like how do you do it to help yourself stay healthy and keep yourself top of your priority list?
So I think it's habit. I don't think it's anything special about me. I think it's just the habits. And so, I do get my movement in. Every day I try to get some movement in. So if it's a walk, if it's a day where maybe I'm not with my girls, so I'm not running around all day, then I'll, either go on like the bike, lift weights, whatever it is. I also really prioritize my sleep. I'm somebody that I need my 7 hours. And that means that often I'm going to bed probably at like 9:30, 10 o'clock. All my friends know it's like too late for me. We don't socialize at that hour. And then my nutrition. And, one of the examples that I think I actually posted on Instagram recently, but one of the things I'm most consistent with is, yes, I have my breakfast, but I pack my lunch every night. I hate it. I hate the time that after I've put my kids down, the last thing I want to do is actually go back into the kitchen and pack my lunch and do all the containers and all the things. It takes, it maybe 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is. And yet I know that return on my investment will pay dividends, because if I don't pack that lunch, the next day will not set me up for good choices as far as my nutrition, but also how I feel. And it has a trickle down effect. So I'd say those are probably the 3 kind of key areas that I try to prioritize.
I love that. And I think, it's funny you said that like the return on investment piece there. And I think what we're really talking about today, if I'm trying to like summarize, is valuing the way that we feel, right? Like that's really what we're talking about. Because when we talk about like return on investment, and I said like, oh, like if you put $100 into this investment here, it's going to turn into 1,000, right? We value that, right? We value money. So you're like, yeah, take my $100. Like that's amazing. I'm going to get a 10 times return on that. We can see it. It's like logical, although maybe not logical in this economy, how you're making that much money off $100, but whatever, it's besides the point. But the thing is that we actually value it, right? We value the money. And so we are happy that it grew. I think what we're actually calling out here is that if you don't value how you feel, then putting the time and investment into your health is always going to feel like a loss. It's always going to feel like it's just costing you something and that you're not getting anything back. You're going to say that fish oil is expensive, or that therapy appointment was expensive, because we're not actually valuing how we feel when we come out the other side, or the momentum that it's building, or the lack of like cost that we have when we don't feel, when we're not being bitchy. Right. But if we're not valuing that, then of course it's going to feel costly to have to do all of those things. But you said it so beautifully there. You're like, I don't like making my lunch. But the other side of that, what I get out of it is that I feel good. But that only works for you because you value feeling good.
That's such a good point. I never thought about it that way, but that's a very, very good point. And I think because me feeling good enables me to do so many more things. It affects how I show up for my patients, for my kids. And I know what it feels like to not feel good. Right. And so I think for some patients, maybe, they'll sit across from me and, they've been iron deficient for years, and often they'll ask, like, why did it take you so long, to come here? And I think maybe they just don't know that it's, not normal to feel that exhausted. Like, yes, it can be common to feel exhausted, but it doesn't mean that everyone needs to feel that exhausted. And there's things that we can do to actually feel a lot better.
And I think as you start to like make that headway, and if you're listening and you like can recall a time where you did feel better than you do right now, I also think just our tolerance for feeling shitty needs to go down, right? Like our tolerance for that needs to go down so that, how we joke about people who have a man cold. My husband jokes about me having a man cold. And it's like, Jordan, if you get like this little bit of like a sniffly anything, I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, I can't handle this. But it's because I like feel like pretty good most of the time. And if I feel that like 10% loss of good feeling, I complain about it. And I'd like to do everything in my power for that to stop. But if you've walked around feeling like garbage for a long time, your tolerance for it actually has probably increased, meaning that like you've normalized how that feels. And you're like, yeah, well, just another day where I don't feel that great. But if you suddenly stop tolerating that feeling, all of a sudden it starts to like put pressure on you to prioritize the things that will make it go away.
Yes.
Tell us about your webinar. So you're doing an educational event. It's free for our community. What are your goals with doing that? Like, who are you hoping to support and what are your goals?
Yeah, so the webinar, it's called Eating for Hormonal Health in Perimenopause and Menopause. And so essentially women, if you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, or even if you're in your 30s and you're kind of like, what should I expect? I think there's going to be a lot of great information. The idea behind it is just that women, their metabolism and just their nutritional needs change as they get older, right? So we are not the same person in our 40s, 50s as we are in our 20s and 30s. And we have different needs, and we do have to be more intentional with how we're fueling ourselves. And so we're going to cover that in that early perimenopause stage and then that late perimenopause, menopause stage, as far as what are those key aspects of your nutrition that are most important to focus on. We'll talk about some of the consequences of not focusing on them. And so there's going to be a ton of great information that I'm actually really excited to share with all the women.
That's so helpful. And I think, that education is so valuable when there's been so much misinformation and when like something's not common knowledge, right? Like this is not the like, we're not going to bang you over the head saying you need to eat kale, mostly because we think it's gross, or at least. But like that model of education of like, this is what you need to eat is actually not that effective, because if we asked you what you need to eat, you probably know lots of things. The nuances in how things change as we get older, and that's not common knowledge, actually. That's where listening in, tuning into some education with a great practitioner actually can help you. So it's not just about, don't choose the Smarties, choose the kale. It's about why conceptually do things change as we age? Because if you know that, it makes that conversation so much more, it lands just so differently if you actually understand the why.
100%. I find that. And I think what actually maybe even led to me thinking about doing this webinar is because I would find that speaking with patients one-on-one, right? When we're talking about why, maybe they need to be more mindful of their carbs or saturated fats or protein, whatever it is, as they enter that perimenopause, menopause phase, then suddenly they're like, oh, I get it. And they're just more motivated to kind of make those changes.
Yeah, there's a lot that's in your wheelhouse as far as making supporting yourself. And I think, events like this, even in the podcast, it like gives you those opportunities to hear from really great clinicians. It's evidence-based. It's not TikTok, giving you just another bit of information on weight management in midlife. I think that this is going to be a really great event, and we'll put the links to the show notes and everything links in the show notes so you can sign up for the webinar. They have to register, right?
Yes. So the webinar is next Thursday. That's November 23rd, and registration is open right now. Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll put those links in the show notes. Andrea, for our women that are listening, like what's your like final message? I would say, like, what's that sword that you're like willing to die on a hill to help women with their health?
Yeah, I think that what I'd like women to know, or is just to really recognize the value in prioritizing themselves. And like we were talking about, just that return on investment when they invest in their health, and not just on, maybe how they feel today, but their future health as well. And also that ripple effect it's going to have on others. And so maybe the next time, maybe you're feeling a bit guilty about taking some time for yourself, or you need some motivation, re-listen to this episode. I think it's been great. And always remember that your needs matter too.
Yeah, totally. And I was trying to think while you were describing the things that you do that, how you prioritize yourself. And my answers are not that different than that, right? It's like the gym for me is really non-negotiable. And it's funny, I've just gone through like this 12-week window where I've been like less consistent than ideal, right? And it's like, it's funny because even us as professionals, you can sometimes forget how important those habits are in building your capacity and building your health. I just finished saying to a friend, like, I've had like the crappiest PMS window of like months and months. And then now I'm like, oh, light bulb, Jordan, like you're literally about to say that you've not been super consistent with the gym in the last 3 months. And we're wondering why, right? We felt more moody this PMS window. And so I think that's part of also what makes it so challenging for us to like tie cause and effect, because it's the consistency of these small habits that build how we feel over many months.
Yeah.
I really wish that if you like ate one stick of broccoli, like you felt like $1 million, because it would make our job so much easier.
Much easier.
The gym for me is one. And then I also bring my lunch every single day, and it's the same thing. And it's like this must of getting those Tupperwares into the dishwasher so that they're ready tomorrow morning, and making sure that we have all the things and putting the leftovers. And it's so annoying. Sometimes I wish I had it in me to Uber Eats my lunch. But I just can't do it. No. Because I know like the cost is like so high, not just on the fact that it's like $45 to Uber Eats yourself a salad, but you just don't feel that good afterwards.
I know. Yeah. The lunch, the sleep, and the exercise. Those are definitely the key ones. I'm just edgy if I don't. And I just don't like who I am.
Yeah, I agree. How can our listeners learn more about you, Andrea, and like get more connected with you aside from going to your webinar, which we're going to put in the show notes?
Yeah. So I am on Instagram. So you can find me. It's andrea.gree.nd. So I regularly post content related to women's health. And then I do see patients both in person and virtually here at Clarity Health in Burlington.
Love that. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. And hopefully we'll see all of you listening on our webinar.
Yep. Thanks so much for having me, Jordan. It's been a lot of fun.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.